Hey everyone, Jeff Dormans, Chief Investment Officer at ARCA, back again for another edition of That's Our Two Satoshis Live, where we talk about everything happening in the digital asset market for the week. As always, quick disclaimer, this is not investment advice. You can also go to our website, ar.ca/blog, and read the written That's Our Two Satoshis write-up for those who prefer to read rather than listen. But essentially, another strong week last week for price action in crypto. Once again, kind of maybe hard to find a real root cause other than the upcoming election. Overall, we saw some positive things. Total exchange volume saw a large bounce, up 23% for the week. What's interesting to me about the exchange volumes is it's coming in different fashions. So overall, like I said, overall the volumes were higher, but still nowhere close to what we saw in the peaks of 2024 or even anywhere close to the peaks of 2020 and 21. But what's interesting is the makeup. If you look at decentralized exchange volume relative to overall volume in spot trading specifically, led by Uniswap and Aerodrome, we're pretty much back to all-time highs. Almost 15% of all trading is now happening on DEXs. But if you look at the decentralized derivatives, you're basically futures trading and some option trading, but really mostly future trading. It's the opposite. We've seen just a consistent decline of decentralized derivatives volume relative to overall volume. So it kind of makes a little sense. On the spot side, obviously, we've lost a fair amount of centralized exchanges, namely FTX and some others that have disappeared, and therefore there's not as much spot trading. And then you've seen, again, the rise of Aerodrome on Base. But it's pretty surprising. You've seen DYDX just completely kind of fall apart, even though there's been some up-and-comers in the decentralized derivative space. It's just not coming close to the volume seen on Binance and Deribit and OKX. So a little bit interesting to see that dynamic. I think most investors, myself included, expected the decentralized derivatives to really take off, just like they have in more traditional finance, and just yet to see that. Elsewhere, the other thing I thought was interesting was the Bitcoin mining stocks continue to outperform Bitcoin itself. Last week, Bitcoin was up about 9%, while the Bitcoin miners were up on average 19%. You could even throw Coinbase, obviously not a miner, but another crypto stock. Coinbase up almost 30% now in the last couple of weeks. I think there's a couple things here. I think some of it is based on as the market has really keyed in on a Trump victory and even potentially a Republican sweep across Congress. Definitely some sectors that will do better than others. Certainly, Bitcoin miners have been linked to a positive price action based on a Trump victory, but also Coinbase itself, right? I mean, there's no other U.S. company that has its grasp in crypto more so than Coinbase. So seeing anything that would be positive coming out of the SEC as well as just crypto regulation in general, pretty good for Coinbase stock. So interesting to see that, and elsewhere, even the gaming sector, which has really been sort of a laggard this year compared to some other sectors, got a little bit of a shot in the arm last week, basically because the Avalanche subnet-based game Off the Grid reached the top rank on the Epic Game Store. So the fact that you can play this across multiple platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, Epic Game Store, and on PC. It's really sort of one of the few hits that we've seen, certainly in the gaming space, since Axie Infinity back in 2021. And more importantly, it's a little differentiated in the sense that nobody who plays it really needs to even be aware of the blockchain nature of it. So some positive things here and there in the market, but overall, I think the consistent kind of growth in crypto over the last 5 to 6 weeks is really based more on this Republican sweep that started to be baked in. And it's not just crypto. We're seeing it across equities, across gold, basically the reinflation trade, the likely for lower corporate taxes, et cetera. What I found even more interesting, though, is if you look at, everyone's so geared up on who's going to win the election. We've mentioned this in the past. It really doesn't matter who wins. Typically, the pattern ahead of presidential elections is a lot of uncertainty and choppy trading up until an election, and then after the election, regardless of who wins, as long as there's a peaceful transfer of power, you generally see markets go higher. Even more so, Deutsche Bank put out a really interesting chart talking about the annualized returns of the S&P 500 based on each presidency, and it's almost identical. We'll put the chart in one of our two Satoshis going forward. It didn't make it into last week's, but we'll put it into next week's. But Biden's presidency, annualized returns of 14%. Trump, annualized returns 16%. Obama, 15%. Clinton, 17%. Bush, 15%. Reagan, 15%. Carter, 12%. Ford, 15%. So basically, we're talking about almost no delta, right? Annualized returns between 12 and 16% for every president since the 1970s, with the only exception being Bush 2, who had a negative 4% return from 2001 to 2009. And that was obviously based on the financial um, crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, more so than anything else. So, I don't think it ultimately matters. Obviously, crypto and stocks are not the same, but from a risk taking standpoint, I don't think it ultimately matters too much in the long run, but certainly in the short run, better for crypto if you do get Trump and Republicans in there. Pretty widely viewed, or pretty widely accepted view. Even again, if it ultimately doesn't matter longer term. What I think is more interesting though is if you look at the upcoming odds in the presidential election. Um, I think we've talked about the crypto investing paradox before, right? The idea that investors are betting on a use case of crypto, even though a lot of the use cases today are being hampered by government regulation. Alon Salat was on here a couple of weeks ago from Merrick Solutions saying that crypto no longer suffers from an existential crisis, but rather it now has a relevance crisis, meaning we know blockchain exists, we know it works, but is it ever going to be relevant? Is anybody going to actually care about it again? Mostly because there's just been an underwhelming lack of popular applications, right? We see a lot of gambling and trading. We've seen a lot of stablecoin usage, but there just hasn't been a successful consumer-facing app. Which is why we get excited about things like Off the Grid built on Avalanche, or some of the flash in the pans that haven't held. Things like when OpenSea was briefly successful, or Axie Infinity, or STEPN, or you name it, right? So many flash in the pans that come and go and don't have any staying power. Meanwhile, ChatGPT, reached 100 million downloads in just 4 days and continues to shine. Even the Threads app within Facebook or Meta, same thing, had 100 million downloads in just a week, and it has continued. So nothing in cryptos had come even close to this level of engagement, which is why people do get excited about anything that's happening. But Polymarket might be the one, right? And this is where it gets a little interesting. So Polymarket, for those not familiar, it's stablecoin powered prediction market platform. It's getting a lot of press because you have real betting markets on not only the outcome of the presidential election, but other races as well. There's even a little sports and gambling on there, but for the most part, almost all the volume is based on the presidential betting market. 2 billion in total volume now, even though the open interest is much lower, but 2 billion total of trades. And you're seeing Trump with a resounding lead right now, almost 65% for Trump, 35% for Harris. First of all, just to help clear some of this up, I think there's a little bit of a misnomer of what this means. It doesn't mean that Polymarket and the polls are different, right? Polls are basically 50-50, maybe a slight tilt in favor of Trump. But you have to think of it this way, which is the difference is the polls indicate the number of total votes, right? So, and prediction markets are more the probability of winning. So if, let's say, there was only 100 votes total in a presidential election, if the polls came back 50-50, you would probably equate that to a 50% probability on prediction market like Polymarket as well, because it's just a toss-up. But if that same poll came back 52 Trump, 48 Harris, even though it's a slim margin of victory, if you have a lot of confidence in that 52 being accurate, you might have an 80% value on the prediction market. So it's not that these two things are moving in different directions. They're moving in the same direction, but the Polymarket odds are much more about probability of winning than it is about margin of winning. So that being said, there's a lot of talk about, is Polymarket, is prediction markets, are these going to be, something that has real staying power? And I don't know is the answer, because we've seen this before, right? Prediction markets are not new. They've been around for decades. Yes, the crypto version of it may be slightly built better, or it might just be right time, right place, right? We're into a gambling culture now. People are much more willing to gamble on just about anything. The question is it going to be sustainable after the election? And I don't know, because, again, you could look back at Augur, and we put this chart in the Two Satoshis write-up. I mean, Augur was one of the first apps ever built on crypto, a prediction market back in 2016, 2017. And you can look at the total TVL on Augur right up until the 2020 election and thereafter, and TVL fell off a cliff, right? Blockchain, again, didn't create prediction markets. It's simply been a pretty good use case of them. But even Polymarket isn't the first one either. I mean, there have been others within crypto that have failed miserably once an election comes about. So I think that is sort of a big story in crypto, because, again, we are grasping at straws for any sort of a consumer app that can have real staying power and not just be a 2 or 3 month blip. And Polymarket has shown some real strength. And I hope, for the sake of the industry, not so much for Polymarket or anything else, but for the sake of the industry, I hope people still care about Polymarket post the election. I don't have a lot of high degree of confidence that that will be the case, given what I've seen in the past. But we'll see, and we'll certainly be watching that. So again, overall market trading well pretty right now. Don't really think ultimately it matters who wins the election for the long term. For the short term, it certainly does matter. But more importantly, would like to see some regulation put in place that gets some more consumer apps being built, and hopefully some of the ones that are already being built have some real staying power. So that's it. Like I said, in the blog at our website, ar.ca/blog. You can read the whole That's Our Two Satoshis write-up. We'll be back again next week with more. In the meantime, it really is just a macro election trade until something specific happens. So we're looking for that just as much as you guys are, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody.